What is up, Generals? We are back with Ultimate General Civil War, and this is the J&P Rebalance Union Diet Legendary playthrough. We're finally tackling the Battle of Shiloh. I've decided to do the whole battle in one video. We're playing it at 200 times speed, so basically double what I played it at. And we're going to knock this out in one video because, honestly, I want to move on with the campaign, right? Like, I've been living with the specter of Shiloh over my head for basically the entire campaign up until now, and it took a number of tries, and here we are. I got pizza. I got a couple of beers, and I gave this a couple of shots. It took 2 or 3 tries that night to get it, and it's been a few days. I've recovered, had the weekend to do this. So what we're doing here is trying to cast the widest net of visibility that we can manage, and then just approaching the opening phase of the battle as best we can. The fact is, undeniably, I'm going to get bruised here in the opener. There's just really no way around it. And the reason is I've got rookies. Well, there's 2 parts of it. One, I've got rookies. 2, I just don't have enough units, like, by comparison. They get a lot of stuff in the battle here, and they're fresh, they're big. They're not like, because I get some splits here, they're not actually oppressively bigger than my units, but they're certainly big enough that they don't really care about whatever fire they receive on the way in. They don't give a shit at all about any of it. I have the New York Spitfires, who are going to do some really good work in this battle. Deployed off to the far left, you can see that one of my new brigades, the 9th Connecticut, is getting mauled in the middle. And it's obviously not a great start for them in this battle. But we are slowly but surely able to kind of stabilize with the expectation, just the knowledge that I'm going to take losses. We slowly stabilize things. It's a messy process, as you can see. And I have to sort of continuously shift things around to kind of redress holes in the line as we go. But we get there. And messy though this is, believe it or not, this is one of the better openings for this battle. Like, I routinely didn't even get past this phase because it was so awful that I'd be like, cool, like, I'm gonna walk away from just this one segment of the battle with 50% casualties, like, it's just not worth it. So we've kind of begun to establish our front lines. As you can see, they're anything but secure. But the Spitfires are putting rounds on Triggs Battery. The 7th Maine has redeployed into the farmhouse. The reason I use the farmhouse as a defensive position is you get okay cover there, and they have a really wide angle of fire. They can support a lot of different positions. So ultimately what I'm trying to do then is push 8th New Hampshire back into that line of trees where Shaver is currently getting mauled from a couple of different directions. And the reason that we fight this out is that, yeah, like, that block of 3 Confederate units in the middle there in the woods is in a really shit place. Bro, they're just gonna get there. They're just gonna get there. There's really nothing you can do to get around it. In the vanilla game, it's not entirely impractical to try and hold the river line here and use this to inflict a lot of casualties, but it's just impossible to do it in the Rebel. And the reason is that they've got too much cover on the approach. There's too many ways for them to get to your little wooded position, and you can't keep them from crossing the river. They've got too much cover to get to your position, and you can't see stuff coming far enough away to shell it before it gets there. And shelling it's an important part of this because it saps their morale. So yeah, like as you can see, like the opener here is incredibly awful for the Union. It is falling back, taking horrendous losses, and just banking on artillery or the Confederate AI getting distracted or confused or, I don't know, tired or bored or I don't know, man. Like, this part of the battle's fucking awful. It's terrible to play. Doesn't feel good at all. And it really saps your willpower to keep this thing going. Now, that said, I get that this is the hardest part of... This is one of the hardest battles in the entire Union playthrough. And it's explicitly because of the situation, of the scenario that you are in. And this is not that terribly far off from a, oh dear God, they're everywhere and we're overwhelmed standpoint. From what I envision the actual Union commanders on the ground would have probably felt in the moment. Obviously the numbers here are way different and all that kind of shit, and I knew they were coming, and there was still nothing I could do to stop it. Very annoying for me is the fact that Robinson here made contact on the far right with the 1st Ohio. I really, 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 really wanted to avoid being in melee with my one good 2-star unit. And of course, there was just nothing I could do to prevent melee from occurring. So at this point, all I can do is just drown Johnson in bodies. I'm swarming him with the 11th Rhode Island, who have taken some losses already, and the 13th New Mexico. And we're just going to drown him in dudes, right? Like, this is a very Soviet Imperial Guard kind of approach to the battle. So I can imagine that there are, in fact, actually commissars, political officers shooting Union soldiers in the back as they try and retreat. Not one step back, says comrade General Lincoln. And I've retreated here to basically the line that I'm going to maintain for the rest of the battle. Until I fall back to Pittsburgh Landing. This sucks. This is not a great place to be, but there, to be completely honest with you, isn't a better position for the Union. The reason that I kind of like where I'm currently deployed is twofold. One, there's no place that the Confederates can attack me without me seeing it coming, as we've established, because they seem to charge at warp 7, and no offense to Panda or Johnny, I flat out do not believe them when they tell me that the AI is also governed by the condition mechanic. I just think it's fucking bullshit. And I think what's really happening is that they have, 175 in the stamina stat, and the recovery is insanely quick. That's probably what's really happening behind the scenes. From a play perspective, it feels as if they don't have stamina. They have infinite immunity to stamina, and they're also immune to, for the most part, morale, unless you just pour a truly stupendous amount of firepower into them. Now, that part of it is probably tied to the fact that my dudes just don't have a lot of experience. And so we're putting these volleys into these units, but they're not probably hitting very hard. And so, generally speaking, what the Union experience of this battle is going to be is everyone's exhausted forever, always. No one can shoot anything. And you're fighting an invincible horde of tireless automatons who could not begin to care less about the 250 dudes you just murdered in front of them. They couldn't care. All they want nothing more than to slake their thirst on Union blood. They don't care about shooting. Shooting is the thing they do in their downtime. They want to close with the bayonet. Again, it's incredibly frustrating to play this, but the benefit, I suppose, is that the opening phase here is mercifully short. This part does not go well at all for me. We're on the right now by the Spanish Field in Larkenbell. And when I'd done this in testing, I tested a couple of times in this phase, and pretty reliably every single time, a brigade of infantry rushes one of these flags, trips it, and boom, we're off to the races. I have exactly no interest, none at all, in fighting this part of the battle. I have negative interest. It is in my best interest to transition out of this phase as soon as humanly possible. I have no generals on the field. I have no supply wagon. I have a grand total of 4 stars out of the 9 units currently on the map. I just have no desire at all to fight this battle at this point. Additionally, I really want to open this thing up to the whole battlefield so that there is an appreciable gap between the 2 major corps that are attacking here. There's the corps on the left, I believe that's under Polk, and the corps on the right. And it's Bragg. Okay, sure, but there's someone else. Armistead, maybe. I'm sure we'll find out. I'm sure I'll see a pop up that'll tell me. So what I want to do, right, is I want to transition out of this phase as soon as possible, so that, let's just say it's Armistead. His units are basically on the southern end of the map, and then the attacking forces of Polk over by Shiloh Church are up on my dick. And what my hope is that I can then pour 2nd Lancers and 3rd DC Light into that gap, and then have them run around in the backfield running roughshod over, unsupported, undefended artillery or supply wagons or whatnot. Again, I did this a couple of times in testing, and it mostly worked out. And of course, on the one that I decided to make, like my recording, what do? They stop shy of the flag. They start shelling me, and we fight this out. Now, quite frankly, I should probably have been like, cool, this isn't the one. Let's re-rack and restart and try it again. But I get a lucky capture here on Holden or Hodgson, whatever. It's just 1 battery out of the game immediately. And we get a couple of good volleys on these guys trying to come up the river. I have no chance of holding. None. There's no chance I'm going to hold anything. So I basically just want to minimize my time in this phase. But the worry I have now is you see Chambers or Chalmers or whatever, his brigade and Pond and a couple of them, like, dudes are walking up the field, right? So that hole that I want to pour my cav into, and theoretically speaking, if I'm feeling saucy, one of my cav unit or skirmisher units, there's that hole's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so the opportunity to get basically free kills, what amounts to free kills on cannon and supply wagons, are also beginning to evaporate. So I'm feeling the pressure. I'm not having a good time, right here. I'm a few beers in. I got a third of a pizza in my belly. Like I'm feeling pretty good. It's a weekend. I just got off work, so like I stick it out. Let's just see how this goes. Let's see how the fight for. At this point in time, I'm thinking let's just see how Hornet's Nest goes. If I can retreat in good order to the Hornet's Nest and maybe maintain kind of a solid position there and kind of begin turning the Confederate flank, or more importantly, de-gunning them, then maybe we'll see how this shakes out. Now, I end up playing this out. I end up playing the whole battle on this particular run through. It's a nasty fight, dudes. It's a nasty, bloody drag out. And I take, I don't know, I think 18,000 casualties is what I end up walking out of this battle with. It's awful, but like, I don't know how you walk away with less. A high training start would have a different outcome, obviously, sure, but they would also have a smaller army, in my opinion. So here we are. So I do try and launch 2nd Lancers and 3rd DC Light into the hole. I basically immediately abandon whatever front line I'm maintaining on the right, because I've got, again, zero interest in holding any of it. My position that I want to maintain is going to be anchored on my left by the Hornet's Nest, and then in the center by the position where Legendary Fiasco and 1st Ohio and 11th New York currently are, fighting that 1 brigade still, by the way. And then anchored on the far Union right by the position where, I can't see it anymore, the other general, whatever his name is. It's not Grant. I end up replacing him with Grant because you get him at the end of this battle, but that guy, whoever he is. Barnes, yeah. So Bucky Barnes is holding my right. I'm in the middle, and then random dude bros are on the left. The saving grace is that I get skirmishers to provide recon and spotting more than anything else, and We get 1 or 2 batteries of artillery picked up. We've already knocked out one of Trig, which is great. We've captured one of the other one, and then we're running off finally some of the Confederate units. The Union Cav here is all about 400 guys per squadron. And what that means is then that the Confederates don't have massive squadrons of cav either. But I am bringing fairly big light infantry units, 750 men, with the intention that I'm going to let them naturally attrit or bleed down to like 350. Like I'm going to put a couple of rookies in them to top the units off, but for the most part I'm going to let them naturally bleed down and then keep them at around 350, 400, somewhere in there. Same idea with the Cav. Cav starts this battle at 450 or 500, and I'm going to let them naturally bleed down to, I don't know, 400. And this is what my plan is for the army to develop. We pretty immediately beat feet back to that defensive position I was talking about. Immediately I have to kind of call an audible on that plan. And that's because Stevens, there's these 2 Confederate brigades supported by Johnston. Stevens, and I can't read the other one on the screen, looks like Johnson. I don't have enough offensive power to kick them out of that little negative space, that empty open field. They're just going to hang out in that tree line right there. Meanwhile, Stewart, Mark 1 and 2, Shaver, Cleburne, they're all pushing in on my right. And you've seen the fighting thus far. The Union Army, it's fairly beleaguered. Let's put it that way. I thought I was going to pick up scoop another battery here, but they've kept some infantry in their rear. The Union Army is fairly beleaguered at this point in time, but at the same time, we've started, and I do mean that this is barely, but we've started to stabilize something approaching a front. They're going to keep charging, but I've got artillery in an okay position. I've got supporting units. I've got supporting units to the rear. So one of the pros or cons, take your pick, of a low training kind of army like this is I'm more or less required to maintain a reserve, a second line. So I can't do single line abreast. I have to do double line, or more likely, I'd say instead of double line, I'd say double pyramid. Does that make sense? So let's say that I have 6 brigades. Instead of doing them 3x3 or 3x2 for 2 deep, 3 wide, I would do 4 wide and then 2 in the rear, stacked in the middle of the 2 of the 4 front brigades. So in the intersection where the 4 front brigades, the 2 on the left and the 2 on the right, where they meet, that unit to the rear will hang out there, and that way they can support left or right, as the case might be, when we inevitably get charged. Cav is making a killing back here. We're not really killing much, so the phrase making a killing is a bit inaccurate, but what they're doing is they're scooping up batteries, they're scooping up supply wagons, they're really doing some force multiplier type stuff. That's good. It's paying it's going to pay massive dividends over the course of the battle. Removing whole batteries from the equation, denying them their supplies, and you'll see it when we get to the tail end of day 1 in a long time in game. Their artillery will have ammo flashing over their head, and some of their brigades will too. And so we're relatively full on supply or near enough to it. Yeah, we're exhausted. Yeah, we're half strength. Yeah, we're, battered or whatever. But we're supplied. And eventually we're rested. So that's huge. I think that's massive, right? That plays a big role in the Union being able to outlast this army. Because at a certain juncture, they blow their wad, so to speak. And yeah, we're battered, beaten, and bruised, but we're firing at relatively full efficacy. And, you know, at that point in time, we've had several in-game hours of point-blank engagement range combat with the Confederacy. So even my 0-star rookie units are starting to get, you know, firearms in the low 20s or mid 20s, low 30s. And I just scanned over at my screen really quick, but there's a 2-star brigade of infantry. Chalmers, 2-star. He's just running around back there. He's chasing a supply wagon. Now you can see it right there. Or maybe a battery of artillery, whatever. He's trying to run it down. Yeah. Okay. We're not killing anybody doing that, right? Like, obviously he's alive. But you know what he's not doing? He's not charging Bucky's units. He's not attacking anybody. He's not fighting anybody. He's not shooting at anything. He's running down a battery of artillery that even if he does recover it, it's going to be exhausted. It's going to be, you know, half strength. I probably killed the officer. Maybe. You see what's happening here in the center is my lead units, I'm just rotating them in and out. Or not the center, but Barnes's position. I've got the 3 leading units, and then I've got 2 units behind them. And then whatever's behind is trying to rest up. And I don't, it's not perfect. It's not perfect because pretty constantly I'm getting a cycle charged a lot. So I have to pretty regularly rotate out. But they're still able to, because there's the reserve and because the Napoleon's back there, they're still able to keep firing. The New York Zouaves, the 6 New York Zouaves, are in a position that the AI seems uninterested in charging. And so they're providing flank fire, just consistent, ready to go, high rate of fire, high flank fire. Now, the 6 Zouaves, I'm pretty sure they were intended originally to be a melee unit, but that never ended up materializing. And they have the Springfield 55, which has a very high rate of fire, but is like only musket accurate at max range. So now they don't have, I think they have 1 supply wagon that I never end up getting at this point. But like the army is now down to 1 supply wagon. This whole big ass Confederate army is down to 1 supply wagon. You can see where I'm going on this strategy. It's an endurance fight. Because I know I cannot beat the Confederates in a straight up fight. I can't. So what do? I tire them out. I stretch out this particular phase as long as I can, which is not as long as I'd like. But I stretch this particular fight out as long as I can because they've got no supply wagons at this point. Now I'm pulling the Spitfires out of their position, and that's because Chalmers, that unit that I was talking about, the 2-star brigade that's running down the captured artillery, they're getting dangerously close to the Spitfires, and if I can't extract the Spitfires, then I'm going to lose them too. 2nd Wisconsin is in a pretty dangerous position right now. I'm being charged by Jackson, looks like Jackson, and 2nd Wisconsin's kind of cut off right now. At the same time as that's happening, I'm being charged by Stevens here. Now, the worrying thing is that he's charging 11th Rhode Island, which is exhausted. They have not had time to relax because I just haven't had a chance to pull them off the line. That this is something I continue to wrestle with in especially these big battles is like I don't have enough dudes. And so once the economy recovers, once I'm going to start pushing Army Org. And the reason I'm talking about that now is that I theoretically can have 2 full 24, I think, unit corps in this battle. And I only have, I think, 35 brigades in this fight. Yeah, I'm picking up a 3rd supply wagon. Okay, I guess I do get the 3rd. But you see second Wisconsin, they're very cut off. They're very exposed. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get Stevens out of there. He's tearing the Rhode Island boys apart. And it's just tiring them out is the only thing I can do at this point, right? Only thing I can do is just pour fresh, tired Union bluebacks into these firefights, into these melee CQB engagements. I have no other play. But it's working. Barely. Because my cavalry is in the rear, killing all their cannons and stealing all their supplies. We have fresh reinforcements. These are allied units. They are one of the reasons that scaling is being dragged, so out of control. And I think one of the important things about those allied units is that they're able to extend my flank all the way to the river. So I'm able now to maintain a fairly contiguous battlefield position from Barnes's position all the way to the river. Ultimately, I do want to start consolidating in the direction of Pittsburgh Landing. But I probably don't want to do it just yet. I don't know if I can. The Confederate Army is too on my shit. My men are too exhausted. My units are functionally immobile. And I'm running into one of the things that I complain about with regard to the exhaustion. But flip side, as I'm having this conversation with you, I complain about the exhaustion, but I think it mirrors the tactical reality on the ground at the time. By which I mean establishing command and control over units in this era, once they were engaged or are engaged, was very hard. Imagine trying to order a brigade of 1,300 men engaged in a firefight to retreat in good order and pull back or shift the line to the right. Armies that could do that would win battles, and armies that couldn't would lose. A lot of Civil War battles historically turned on the timely application of reserves, and the only reason that is the truth is because once the lines had been committed, whomever had the last reserves to commit could commit them at some decisive point, that the other side wouldn't have the resources to defend or counter. And so, I am complaining about my dudes being tired all the time. But once I've committed them, I struggle to get them back out, which is accurate to this era. Now, charging like that across an open field in, maybe a little less accurate, but not unheard of, especially for the Confederates, especially in the early part of the war. In 1862, a good portion of the Union Army had smoothbore weapons, which meant that while things were slightly more lethal than their Napoleonic counterparts, they weren't that far off. It wasn't until later, when artillery got really developed and fire missions got to be like a science, and rifled muskets or carbines, really repeaters, started to take over, and rapid or the extreme prevalence of howitzers and shrapnel started to really make artillery the big killer of the battlefield, that attacking over the open like this became true suicide. At the angle, it's basically World War I type stuff. You have dug in units on both sides, and the only way you can attack is by assaulting en masse one single concentrated point and just hoping you can pour enough stuff into it to force a breach. So we have the same story that's kind of unfolded 1,000 times here, unfolding again. One of their units has just launched itself at me, and I don't have the ability to meaningfully resist on the way in to sap their morale. They make contact. My unit crumbles immediately in melee, and the only option that I can come up with is to swarm it with Union units. It's effective. It's not pretty. Let me tell you, the butcher's bill at the end of this battle is definitely not pretty, but it's effective. Quantity has a quality all its own, right? And the thing that I can do, right? I know as a player, I'm up against a brick wall of like difficulty here in that these units, man for man, outfight me, period. End of discussion. No room for debate. The challenge for me as a player then is to understand that I have at every single level inferior forces and to maximize my application or utilization of those tools I do have, which is to say superior ability as a human to concentrate fires and or manpower. And more importantly, the ability the ability to maneuver in a manner that is concentrated, unlike the AI typically orchestrates. The AI does move as a block, but they don't charge all as one. They don't maneuver and attack in a flying column a la Napoleon. They don't launch themselves in a 3 brigades deep, one brigade wide assault column, which would be devastating if they did it. They attack you across the entire line, onesies and twosies for the most part, and it's brutal. It's devastating, but it's for the most part it's onesies and twosies, like Gibson here attacking Ammon and the right of the Hornet's Nest, or no, screen right, battlefield left. He's outflanked. I'm going to be able to advance with those guys up north, Ammon, Bruce, and whoever else, Hosen, I think, and outflank his attack, and that'll just basically shut it down, right? So like we have at this point in time established a wavering, I would say, front line at every angle of attack for the Confederates. They are facing a staunch wall of Union soldiers. But at any point in time, if they choose to push, this wall will crumble. And it does again and again. And the only thing keeping me going is artillery, the defensive stats of the, A, artillery, B, the defensive stats of the Hornet's Nest, which are awesome. And the fact that I'm forcing the Confederates to attack over open ground for the most part. I am right now desperately trying to extricate my units from Barnes's position on the far right, as at this point in time I feel as if we are pretty spread out, and I very much need to consolidate the Union Army on a relatively small footprint to make use of that redundant defense in depth and the ability to concentrate fire. If I fail to do both of those things, they'll punch through somewhere and just proceed to eat me for lunch, because they don't have a stamina stat, which again, I know they probably do, but it's 275 or something. Things get real dicey here for a bit in the Hornet's Nest. Things are just generally pretty dicey, actually. And we're relying on the artillery to save the day. The queen of battle is going to be the thing that keeps us in this fight. All right. There was a trains coming by, so I had to take a break. Things get dicey here at the Hornet's Nest. King of battle, will be basically what keeps us in this fight for a little longer. I think we do eventually lose the Hornet's Nest, and that's sort of what's underlining or underpinning my deep desire to get Bucky's boys or Barney's boys out of that general, mess of units hanging on the right. As you can see, things go basically tits up in the middle here. Huge casualties from the charge because, it's Shiloh, and massive losses is what you're going to get. I rush units into the fray to try and fill the gap. We keep on using Cav to try and slow down the artillery. It is probably not as effective as it could be. I should probably have all three of these units brute squatting around together, to be honest with you. As it stands, the two squads struggle to take on this large of a clump of artillery together. And a big portion of that is that I'm not concentrating them on one battery. So I've got the whole brute squad kind of attacking their whole brute squad. And so the end result is that we're doing it kind of in a piecemeal fashion. And as you can see, 3rd DC Light or the Ohio Lancers or somebody, they got scared off by, I am assuming, close-range canister fire. End result of which is they retreat, and then they abandon the other cav unit, whomever it is, to kind of engage in that melee alone. And yeah, we're inflicting pretty heavy losses on their artillery. That's great, but I mean, man, we're taking a beating in the process, and I think one of these squadrons of cav will ultimately end up shattering in this fight as a result of them being fairly small, and then being asked to handle an awful lot of fighting. And the other thing is that Gladden here is back here with the cannon. So they're not unsupported like they would ideally be would have been in testing. I'm trying to relieve overall the pressure on the Hornet's Nest by attacking with the allied troops here, so Bruce, Eamon, and Hosen. I'm trying to kind of create a new front or open a new front, force the Confederates to deal with the troops on their right flank, and I'm desperately trying to get Barnes's units out of that engagement and collapse in the middle here, because I am increasingly of the opinion that probably at this time in this time when I'm fighting the battle, probably once the Shiloh Church countdown hits 0, they're probably going to kick us to the broader map and have me fall back to Pittsburgh Landing, and then the real show begins. And that's where genuinely I think the Union can start turning this around from a desperate last stand to kind of a vengeful defensive. But in the meantime, we have things like Tribune. 4,000 dudes charging at me. Now, I don't know how I managed to cancel that charge, but thank goodness. We have Stevens coming in again. 2 stars. He's already battered to hell and back. He doesn't care. And guess what? My guys are still exhausted. Because I just can't get them off the fucking line. It's not even an issue of not trying. They're so exhausted and so slow, I can't get them out. Because they take 19 years to take 5 steps back, and I have nothing to backfill them with. So even if I did get them off the line, even if I did get them a reprieve, what am I gonna fill it in with? So as I'm taking stock of the wider battle and the state of the Union Army of the Potomac, if I'm gonna be doing this kind of an army, especially for these big battles, I've got to have every single slot that they'll let me fill filled. And to be completely honest, even with economy and scraping every dime I could, because I went into this battle flat broke. Every dollar had been spent. I had 2,000 guys, I think, or maybe 4,000 men that I could theoretically have pulled to fill the army out, but I didn't have any guns to give them. And I had nothing else to bring from a manpower or from an equipment standpoint. I couldn't afford to fill out anything else in the army. We get very lucky here. Stevens, after taking 1,000 casualties, surrenders, which is great. He's one of only a few that we end up getting that aren't artillery. We do capture quite a bit of artillery. and a number of supply wagons, but I think we only really get Stevens and one or two other brigades over the course of the fight that eventually just basically tucker themselves out from all the charging. I do kind of think about collapsing my cavalry into a brute squad of 3, and that's more effective at taking out some of these guns. But at the same time, I think the opportunity has come and gone. By which I mean, I had probably a chance to get in there and get those guns, and I missed it because my cav is now tired, right? And I can't, in good conscience, launch them into the fight. So I have to wait and rest them, and by the time I'm done resting them, we're in a different phase of the battle, or the guns have moved up and they're supported. You get the idea, right? Like, it's just I'm not gonna get them with the cav. Man, can you imagine though, like, what a force multiplier it would have been knocking out a good chunk of the artillery before this fight really got to this stage? Because this is, I think, really when you have the first chance to really hold anywhere. Up until this point in time, you're just buying time. You're giving ground strategically so you can try and just last a little longer. And not for nothing, that's as you see, that's what I'm doing on the right. Like, I'm just dying slowly on the right, as slow as I can. It's the best I can manage in this fight. Which, doesn't feel great in the moment, but it is the nature of the battle. It is, especially when I'm not rocking a bunch of 1 and 2 star units. I've got, this is the fight. My men are tired all the time. They need babied. I would love, no joke, I would love to see a return. There was a stamina stat in the vanilla game that would give you stamina. And man, that sounds so stupid. Right? Because at a certain point you max stamina and it doesn't do any good. Okay, I get that. That's fine. Heard. What if that perk, instead of being just points and stamina, what if that perk was extra condition regen? Right? Because I think in the vanilla game was called endurance training. And it's like plus efficiency and plus stamina. Something kind of like that. Man, what if it was extra stamina regen, or I don't know if that's even possible in the code, right? But what if it was that? And then this is where, third DC light almost certainly shatters here because they eat canister in the face. I'm able to hit with Ohio Lancers and then the first cav, whomever they are. Pennsylvania, I think. They hit that one battery, but like, you see, my counter battery cavalry mission is falling apart really quick. Because I don't have enough critical mass. Cavalry is one of those things where if you don't have enough, it's almost worse than not having any, because you've used a unit slot. But if you have enough, it can turn the tide of the battle. It can be a huge force multiplier. And I don't think that I had enough at this point. So yeah, we're causing a lot of damage to this guy's battery, and we're gonna go run down somebody else's. But like, I forget if they all make it, but I'm pretty sure they're combat ineffective before too long. One of my brigades is shattered, as you can see on the left, screen left, Union right. And you right, like the army's crumbling. You can sense it if you're. I get it. I'm playing at 2x speed, so this thing's kind of going pretty quick. But when I'm playing this, I can feel that my army is starting, like, it's right on the edge of breaking. It is. This thing is touch and go. Like, if one of these combats goes poorly, that's it. And when I'm playing right here, when Trebu retreats past me into my rear, I'm sitting here thinking like, fuck, that's pretty much it, right? Like, that's that's GG, because now I've got 3,500 men or whatever in my backfield, and I've got nothing. But this combat against Martin goes surprisingly well. And we get, this is the thing that like turns the battle for a second. This combat against Martin goes surprisingly well. We're able to wheel on Trebu, who is trapped against the river. And I don't think we capture him. I think we shatter him. But, dude, that's 3,500 Confederate soldiers gone from the line. That ends up being decisive in allowing us to stabilize a little bit. Because right now, I mean, this is looking really touch and go, right? Like, this is on the edge. At any moment, they'll find the willpower to push that charge through, and they'll launch on the Hornet's Nest, and my guys who are just given everything they've got, they won't be enough. Because, I mean, you look at my units, they're warmed up, they're exhausted, they're tired. There's only a handful of things here and there that are fresh, and that's the artillery. The artillery is, you know, like, is the blessed branch of the Union Army right now. Yeah, there goes one cav unit, and that's because there's infantry right there. Stewart is putting rifle fire on me, so like I just can't attack that cannon. And all the other cannon, for the most part, is protected as well. So you're getting the sense, hopefully, as you kind of watch my army fall apart, you're getting the sense of just how desperate this defense really is. It is in every sense of the word a desperate last ditch. You know, no holds barred. It's this or the Confederates march on DC. Kind of an effort. And the saving grace, I guess, if you can call it that, as I'm watching this again, because when I'm playing it, I'm only worried about my guys, right? But I'm also starting to notice as I watch this video that I think they're running out of steam too. And as we discussed earlier, I have the supply wagons. Maybe I don't get all their cannon, but I got most of their supply wagons, if not all. I got 3. I don't know how many they have, but I got 3. Trebu, who was 4,000 men earlier, is now down to 3, and he's got nowhere to go. And I've got Ammon in 3rd Illinois pinning Martin, who just now decides to launch himself into a charge again. But, you know, like for the most part, it kind of looks like they're running out of steam. Now, again, I am too. All right, heard, understood, I got it. But they're running out of gas. This push on the Hornet's Nest is going to suck. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's awful. It goes about as poorly for me as you think it's going to go at this point. We give as good as we get. Don't get me wrong. But I've got 3 light infantry units and 2 battered brigades of infantry who are both, at this point in time, probably taking 30% casualties, going off against 5 charging and relatively full strength Confederate brigades. And the artillery support has been pulled back, as you can see, because I am preparing to advance to the next stage of the battle. So this goes about as awfully for me. It's about as awfully for me as you think it's going to go. Now, the other side of this battlefield, one of my brigades, and I forget who exactly it is, I want to say it's 8th New Hampshire, but I'm not sure, is exhausted and locked in melee with a Confederate brigade charging. I, at this point in time, because they've been exhausted since the battle began, have just abandoned them to their fate. It's 9th Connecticut. I've said, cool, thanks for your sacrifice. It's important. Good luck. Godspeed. And I've got nothing for them. I don't have anybody left to assist. They're buying me time for everybody else to get out and rest up. Because, hey, guess what? First Ohio's fresh again. Yeah, as you can see, crushing them and then being able to throw 2 relatively fresh brigades back into the fight, huge, massive. Yeah, like I said, I abandoned the 8th or the 9th or whatever, 9th, because I wasn't going to be able to get them out there. They're exhausted. They move too slow. Nothing else in the area is fresh. I have already retreated all of my cannon back to Pittsburgh Landing. And my artillery, my cavalry here, as you can see, is rapidly bordering on combat ineffective. So yeah, like it's a done deal. I'll tell you, it's looking pretty rough right now. Right, when I look at this battle, I'm like, ooh, it's not going great. But I knew going into this thing. I knew going in that I'm gonna call it a win if I beat it. Period. It's the hardest Union battle next to perhaps Gaines Mill, or no, Malvern. I think Malvern's probably harder than Gaines. Predominantly because you've got some room to maneuver. In Gaines Mill and Malvern Hill, you're kind of looking at the same situation, really. Like you don't have a lot of room to maneuver, so that's different. At Malvern, and you're up against basically the whole Confederate Army, and your reinforcements come in a trickle. So in that regard, I feel like Malvern's kind of pretty similar and maybe even harder. But at the same time, you've had 7 more... seven's not right. 5? There's 3 battles before Gaines Mill. Then you just go straight from Gaines Mill to Malvern. So 4. You've had 4 battles to build up the army. That's 4 battles to get new recruits, get money, get rep rewards, get... career points to put into medicine or economy or recon or, AO. These are all very important skills, right? But the thing that makes Shiloh hard is that you've had to explode your army from, it's a distress call, it's what, 12 units? 10, something like that, to 48. In a relatively short amount of time. So every dollar is hard to spend. It's precious. It's rare. Poor 9th Connecticut. They've taken 1,200 losses. It's a good thing they were completely fresh recruits using captured guns. They're the 9th Connecticut is going to have a vengeance blood mission to sort of earn their vengeance on the Confederates after this battle, and I will see to it that they have the opportunity to get that back. We lose a division commander, that sucks. We lose a lieutenant colonel, that's Tuesday. I barely notice. Sorry, like unit commanders at this point going down. Yeah, I've got some medicine, but not enough. Most of my army is led by captains, so whatever at this point. I don't really, pay too much mind if a unit commander goes down. It's looking pretty dicey, right, guys? Looking pretty dicey. And I want to remind everybody that I'm at 0.85 for scaling for leadership, or not leadership, experience, and also manpower. So imagine, theoretically speaking, I could have a 15% larger army and a 15% more experienced army. Let me just be the first to say, fuck that. Fuck everything about that. Fuck it right in the air. That sounds awful. I barely got out of this battle as it is at this point, dumbed down. I don't know what kinds of strategic tactical geniuses play this game at 1x scaling, but good God. I think it's too hard to replace your losses, man. You the way that the game is scaled at an economic level, you can't afford to take meaningful losses. Even this low training, rookie-filled experience, I'm punished on a huge level economically just for taking losses. I can't, it's expensive to replace what I lose. I struggle to build new stuff as a result, right? So I can't grow because I'm busy recovering. But to make this work, I need more and more and more. So it's obviously bad. Yeah. I don't remember how long they do this before they say, cool, you could go to Pittsburgh Landing now, because like in the real world, bro, I'd be back there already. Like in a real world scenario where I didn't need to maintain this position, this untenable bullshit, undefendable position any longer than I absolutely had to, my dudes would have beat feet back to Pittsburgh Landing with where the Navy could provide it. Like, they're just off screen. There's 2 gunboats just off screen. I would have been like, hey, guys, sail down like 15 feet and provide fire support from the river. That would have been huge, massive, if I had that, and I don't. I decided to retreat a bunch of the captured stuff off the map edge because, this thing's touch and go as it is. I don't need to be defending supply wagons. I want that money. Like that's $45,000 thereabouts. I want that money. I'm gonna need it. I'm gonna need it going into the buildup for Gaines Mill, because at this point in time, I'm setting the intention that I'm gonna go into Gaines Mill with every single body I can arm, and if that means I bring smaller brigades to do it, then maybe that's what I do. Well, the nice thing about the fact that we're clumped up like this, or where we finally managed to consolidate our command for the most part, there's a big gaping hole in between where my right flank and my center are, and then my left is anchored against the river, so I'm okay as far as that's concerned. But do you see a little bit what I'm talking about when I say it feels like they've run out of gas? Because, again, I am hanging on by a thread. But at this point in time, everybody's where they need to be. Well, in the center. And as you can see, like when you mouse over them, there's a lot of fresh. A lot of fresh are warmed up. And I have supply wagons still, and they don't. And I have a lot of artillery, and they're charging into it over open ground, no less. So this is what I mean when I say it kind of feels like they're running out of gas. And then when we have the opportunity to go to Pittsburgh, which I guess will be in 18 minutes in game time here, you'll see what I'm talking about, where this fierce Confederate army that has been beating the hell out of me, mauling my command. You'll see what happens when we get to those trench lines, because the defensive position at Pittsburgh plus the artillery from the river, it's very effective. It's a great defensive place, and so as a result, they struggle to launch an effective attack against my position once specifically I establish it. We've captured 2 brigades and shattered 1 at this point. We've captured, I want to say, 3 or 4 artillery batteries and maybe shattered one more, and then the remainder are under strength. Like, we didn't kill them all, but they're here, and they're weakened. Look at how much of their shit is still hanging out in the back, trying to run down my cav. My cavalry, despite not really killing much, has paid huge dividends over the course of this battle, because they're forcing the enemy to commit stuff to its rear that isn't relevant to the attack. And as a result, 600 men maybe, and horses, have had a massively outsized impact on this battle, just pulling resources away from the front. If the Confederates were allowed to concentrate everything they had into attacking my position, there's a really good chance you'd be watching my army stream off the map because it's shattered or whatever. But they don't, because they've got to cover the rear. So at this point, I kind of move my shit back to Pittsburgh, and we're going to try and reassemble our defensive line back here in the place that matters. And you'll just see what I'm doing. Ultimately, I think what I initially start trying to do is I start trying to have the Allied units maintain the front line in the trenches, and then my dudes will be immediately behind them as like a backfill or a strategic reserve or a tactical reserve, with the idea that when and if the Confederates charge, my guys can provide very close range firepower for the purposes of trying to shut down their attack, or they have artillery at very close range to shut down their attack. And they've run out, I think, of supplies to meaningfully support their offensive push. So there's no more, I don't think, of these 4,000 man mega brigades coming at me anymore. They've blown their wad. And so you've got this situation where there's tired, worn down 1,500 man brigades exchanging fire with me in the open. And they're probably trading effectively, honestly. But they're wavering, and I'm not. Because the units that aren't truly, utterly shattered on my end have been trading well. And more importantly, they're so tired from their assault that I'm able to, in relatively good order, occupy defensive positions behind the lines, behind the defenses at Pittsburgh. And as a result, like I said, I think they struggled to get off a meaningful offensive. Now, as this sort of screen continues to sort of develop, you'll get what I'm talking about. They attempt to mass on the Union right by this farmhouse along the creek edge where the Pennsylvania long rifles are currently heading. Right around there. They attempt to mass over there. And I think that they probably could have pushed through a pretty healthy attack. But we spoil it with the Pennsylvania boys, and I end up using, I think, First Ohio to kind of to provide enflating fire and really prevent them from getting that attack running, basically. Nothing really develops meaningfully on the right because the artillery from the Navy is so potent that nothing it can do no concentration of forces can maneuver over there in a manner that isn't going to get shattered on the way in. So I'm putting fairly light defenses on the riverine side and comparatively heavy concentrations of soldiers on my right, where the line kind of hooks or bends, where the 12th, Wyoming, Wisconsin, probably Wisconsin, where the 12th Wisconsin's currently located. And I think that's what I'm going to try and do, right? Like if I ever get the sense that they're going to try and push somewhere in the middle, then I'll reinforce that point. But I'm pulling back and developing this reserve in order to make sure that I can pour troops wherever they're needed in the event of an assault. But you can see I've very lightly committed along the river, again, because the Navy is going to just kind of hold that flank for me. And when we get to recording Secure River, which I might do live, actually, when we get to recording Secure River, which is the next battle, you'll see me do the same thing. I'm going to use the Navy to anchor a flank, and then I'll lean into another flank and kind of concentrate my forces in a way that I think will allow me to leverage as much as possible the firepower of the Navy in a way that keeps me from getting hit too hard. But you can see they've got plenty of army left. My dudes are tired, except the ones that aren't. My dudes are hugely battered. You can see on the bottom of the screen the green health bar over some of these brigades. The ones that haven't shattered yet or surrendered, I think one of my light units surrendered, are just beat the fuck up. Except the artillery, obviously. Like I baby my cannons because they're the only things keeping me in this game. And at this point in time, I start building a counter battery, mission. The howitzers and the Napoleons are focused on the infantry, but I'm going to put my Jameses, my Parrots, etc., off into the cannon to try and work on taking out whatever's left over that the cavalry couldn't knock out. And here we go. This is the defense of Pittsburgh. I will say, like, from the way that Johnny and Panda have talked, they really want this last defense at Pittsburgh to be a desperate last-ditch defense. And as you'll watch, I get to be fairly passive here at this last stage. The reason being is that I've taken the teeth out of their attack, but it's taken me a whole day of fighting to get there. And I don't know. Like this is actually, from a game design standpoint, a fairly vexing or difficult problem. How do they make? And again, another capture. This is fantastic. How do they make the opening of the battle, the opening, let's say, half? Because at this point in time, we're looking at the other half of the battle, really. How do they make the opening half of the battle challenging, but not impossible? And then how do they make this stage of the battle challenging without having made the front half impossible? Because by now, most players with a cavalry arm will have worked on sapping this army of its energy, destroying or capturing supply wagons, destroying batteries of artillery where possible, shattering whole units. The players, what we do as players is we don't sandpaper off bits and pieces of the army. Let me use verbiage from competitive tabletop games. So when I'm not doing this and I'm not working and I'm not whatever, I play Warhammer and War Machine. And I've talked about this in some of my other videos, and I think it's a great concept. There are basically two theories, or a couple of different theories of attrition warfare, as discussed with regard to tabletop war games, and I think for the most part it applies here as well. The first, and this is one that generally I'm a fan of, except where force multipliers exist, is called sandpaper. And essentially every turn in the game, you expend a good deal of your efforts destroying the front line of the opposing faction as best as possible. And so in War Machine, a good example of that would be whatever the leading edge of the units and whatever forward deployed robots or warjacks that your opponent has, you work on killing the ones that are the most threatening to you, the closest to you, because they present the biggest or most immediate threat. The pro of sandpapering is that whatever's in engagement range to cause a threat to you is by definition also in engagement range for you to sandpaper back. And so if you destroy that stuff, which is forward deployed and theoretically exposed, it forces the opponent to then in the next turn move more stuff forward and deploy that and then expose that. And in a lot of these games, and as we've seen here in Ultimate General, the act of moving or redeploying your troops means your cannons are offline. Your infantry is spending condition moving and not shooting, or they take longer to reload. And in a war game, like Warhammer, for example, they're less accurate on the move for the most part. And so sandpapering kind of continues to force them to commit units to the front line that maybe they don't want to. Maybe they want to do stuff in the rear, but because you've caused so much damage to their front, they have to commit reserves earlier than they would like to. And some factions, and the ones that I tend to play, are the ones that are really good at this. The other big theory for attrition warfare, which I think has a great deal of merit as well, is looking for the force multipliers and killing those before you do anything else. And so, put another way, generals with no troops do not constitute an army. And the flip side of it is an army with no generals is a leaderless rabble, a peasant rabble who you can then, destroy, defeat in detail, destroy in bits and pieces, and that kind of thing. The reason I'm talking about this stuff here is that there's nothing going on the screen that's interesting. I'm manning the defenses. I'm trying to bait them into charges. There is, I would say, a critical mass of attackers forming on my right by Hardy, his position. And so I'm trying to outflank it, spoil that attack with 11th Rhode Island and the New York Spitfires and maybe even the New Mexico Brigade as well. So the two theories are, generals with no army have no army, or generals with no troops have no army, and troops without leaders are directionless. I think both are equally valuable, and in every player who plays this game knows the power, I think, of removing whole chunks out of the enemy force. So this is why I think Carbine Cav, for example, is so prevalent right now in the meta, is that it can shatter or shock with its initial volley and then run into melee and then cause to rout the opposing brigade and then keep up with it as it tries to run away. And then we hit that point where there's the once they hit 0 morale, every casualty is a die roll, essentially. And if enough casualties, eventually you'll roll whatever you're looking for. And then they'll trigger we have shattered, which one's it going to be? Do we shatter or do we surrender? And then the reason that Carbine Cav is so prevalent in the meta is that if you're in melee, there's a higher incidence or a higher chance of surrender versus shattering. And surrendering is the only way to reliably remove troops completely from the opposing force manpower pool in this game, in Ultimate General. Additionally, if you capture, you can sort of trade them in, so to speak, for more recruits, and you have a higher incidence of weapon recapture from those troops you surrender, or you cause to surrender, than the ones that shatter, you pick up off the ground. The downside of shattering is that those soldiers that do make it off the battlefield are left in the manpower pool and get shuffled into, finger quotes here, new brigades. But as we all know, the AI has a limitless pool of, a cloning machine that spits out Dolph Lundgren from Universal Soldier or something. Like these just super soldiers with hundreds in every stat that don't care about nothing. That kind of deal. And they have, no economy to speak of. Apparently the Confederacy, with less than 5% of the manufacturing capacity and less than 10% of the railroads in the entirety of the United States, is somehow able to produce, as many muskets and artillery pieces as it needs, just at will. So, in the tabletop games, the other thesis of attrition, killing the force multipliers and then leaving the troops behind, let me kind of explain how that works. If you've been playing Warhammer, the basic thesis to Warhammer is if I'm attacking you with a gun, that gun gets a certain number of shots in the course of a turn. For sake of argument here, let's say it gets 2. I roll 2 dice, 2 standard 6-sided die, and if I roll above a certain number, say a 4, it counts as a hit. Now, a force multiplier is something that makes that die roll more efficient. The most common mechanic in Warhammer is the ability to pick up either any miss or the ability to pick up certain numbers, a 1 or a 1 or a 2, or you get the idea. So I roll 10 guys and they all fired 2 dice. So I'm rolling 20 dice. Mathematically speaking, I'm looking for a 4 up. I'm going to get 10 hits. Just statistically speaking, that's about what you'll get. Plus or minus 1 standard deviation, so between 9 and 11 hits. But in there, every single die that rolls has a 1 in 6 chance, right, of being a 1. Let's just say that I've got an officer that provides that force multiplier provides a rule that says roll to attack, and every failed hit roll of a 1, pick it up and roll it again. Well, let's say I've got 3 dice that come up as a 1. So I roll those again, and half of those, so 2, are going to come up as 4 or above. So now I've taken what should be 10 out of 20 die rolls, and I've gotten, let's say, 13. I've polished that math up just a wee bit in my favor. And so I've changed the statistical rules of the game to benefit me. What does that in Ultimate General is not statistics. I mean, you do that with training and skill and everything else. That does push the math better in your favor. So a good example of that, using the example I used before, is if a 4 or above would be a hit for a basic trooper. A more elite trooper would hit on a 3 or above. And so suddenly you've taken 3 of the 6 possible sides for a die roll, and now 4 of the 6 will successfully give you a hit. And imagine if you had that commanding officer who says pick up a 1 and roll it again. And 4 of the 6 of those die that you roll again will hit. So now basically you've only for sure missed when you roll a 2. So in Ultimate General, what does that isn't officers, except for the fact that they provide morale bonuses. That's useful, definitely. In Ultimate General, what does that is things like artillery. When I shoot you, your brigade, with a musket, it causes morale damage. When I shoot your brigade with a musket and artillery damage, artillery causes more morale damage than musketry does. So those two things combined will have an outsized impact on your morale than they do theoretically on the actual hit point damage of the unit. The hit point damage is obviously also important because it reduces its efficacy at offense. Hit points in this game are basically also offense. So Chalmers here with 1,218 dudes, that's how many attacks, in essence, he gets to make in a turn and when he fires. And so it's a big number, right? This is why some of the accuracy numbers can be so low and the battles can feel so lethal, is that you're just doing a lot of die rolls. So the force multiplier is stuff like having an officer, and the officer brings this passive regen. You're passively healing morale damage, which means you can stick out the fight longer. It's not doing anything about your hit point damage, but it's preventing you from running away, or worse, wavering, standing there and ineffectively shooting, but still taking losses. So officers are huge force multipliers. Kill those, and the units don't recover as fast. They don't rally or come back from a retreat as quickly. This gives your guys more of a chance to rest, or more of a chance to focus fire on something else. As you can see, that's pretty big. Killing a general can cause a portion of their line to waver, which frees up resources elsewhere in your line. This is why I find this game so fascinating. It's ultimately a game of the efficient utilization of resources against your opponent and their attempt to efficiently utilize their resources. Especially because hit point damage plus morale damage can eventually equal the trigger condition for shattering or surrendering. And if you kill the officers, those trigger conditions, the morale getting low enough, happen sooner and more reliably. Because as a unit gets lower and lower morale, its native morale regen starts to increase. So like units kind of have a desire to be above a certain level or threshold of morale. And if they're lower than that, it's actually fairly hard to get them to shatter or to push their morale much lower unless you're really pounding them or unless they've routed. And if there's no commanding officer to help buffer their now significantly reduced passive morale regen, you have a chance to engineer a shatter or a surrender. That's why when Trebu, earlier in the battle, when Trebu was cut off and surrounded and his back was to the river, there's a number of factors that go into this calculation. I've seen Panda talk about it a bit. But like if you have allies nearby, you're less likely to surrender. If you are cut off, you're more likely to surrender. If you're in melee, more likely, etc., right? So all these conditions. No officer, and if a unit's cut off or not supported, they're more likely to call it quits because they're like, crap, we're in it alone, we're cut off, it's this is it, boys, we're throwing in the towel. Another big force multiplier is cavalry, and it's deceptive because there's nothing inherently going on with cav that gives it more morale damage or more condition damage or more anything. It's just base traits of cavalry as a unit. It's faster than everything else except generals, I guess. And the other important thing is, for one quirky reason or another, when cavalry fires, mounted cavalry specifically, fires their carbines, they do so instantly, all together at once. Pistol Cav does this too, actually. It's just their range is so short, and you usually almost immediately follow it up with a charge that you never notice. But Pistol Cav does this too. So mounted cavalry fires off their volley all at once. When you watch my brigades, my infantry brigades firing their volleys, you'll notice that it takes a while. And so the passive regen, the passive mana regen, or the damage resistance of some of these units from a morale perspective has a chance to kind of absorb the blow. But with cavalry, it happens all at once. Just boom. You take 30 or 40 casualties, and they all inflict 1.5 morale damage. And so suddenly your unit takes this huge hit. And it's more. if they're getting flanked. It's even more if they're getting rear flanked. You get the idea, right? This is why carbine cav is so powerful. From a mathematical perspective, I get kind of what's going on. And Panda will inevitably come in the comments and tell me what I'm getting right, what I'm getting wrong, etc., etc. Like, this is all just gut feel. I don't know the exact numbers. But the system seems to work this way. And I work in systems. I'm a systems analyst for a major retailer without giving any more away. So I work in systems, and I'm seeing kind of what I think is happening. And from a mathematical perspective, I haven't actually looked at the code because I can't figure out what language this game's written in. And I think you need a hex editor to read any of it anyway, and I don't know how to work those. I work in SQL. I work in SQL and Power BI and Tableau and a bunch of data visualization tools and R and Python. So I don't really mess with hex editors too much. All of these things kind of contribute to why these force multipliers, which is to say artillery and cavalry and skirmishers, are so powerful. Is that they're faster, or they've got more spotting, or they hit harder, or in the case of my skirmishers, for example, they don't really hit all that terribly hard, but they do so from further away than the units the enemy can shoot me. And they do so from stealth when they get stars. So the enemy doesn't even know what's shooting at them. I don't know for sure if this is actually the case, but my feeling, perhaps inaccurate, is that if a unit doesn't see what's shooting it, it actually takes more morale damage too. Because I've noticed that when I have skirmishers in some of my test attempts at Secure River, for example, I have the Spitfires, the New York Spitfires. They're putting in flanking fire on some of the attacking troops. And when they fire off a volley, they only get like 20 kills. But they're stealth. No one can see them except me. And they're using sharps, the sharp rifle. The sharp rifle has a range of 475 versus 400 for the average infantry musket, and I want to say 340 for your smoothbore guns. This is going to be your SF-42, your rebore. Actually fires to 400, I'm pretty sure. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's just the Springfield 42 and maybe the Farmer or whatever they recalled that, which I think is just called musket now. And then like all the carbines, obviously those go to 340 as well. So 475 feels pretty significant, right, on that unit, and eventually I'll get them JF Browns, or if I'm lucky enough to capture some Whitworths, but I'm not really prioritizing it. A, I couldn't afford to before this battle, and then B, we'll figure it out. So these cav are streaming south of the shattered Confederate army. And they're looking for, I want to try and see if I can't rescue 4th Lightfoot, who's surrendered. I don't find them. I don't find them. I don't know where they are. So, poof, there goes 400 guys and whatever gun they had. That sucks, but it is what it is. So I've spent so much of this battle pulling away all of their force multipliers, so that all they're left with is, and look at how battered my army is, all they're left with is their line infantry and I think a handful of their corps commanders. Which brings me back to my whole point of how do you balance that? How do you make that interesting? Because if you've made it this far, you've probably either destroyed many of their force multipliers, or your army is as battered, beaten, and bruised as mine is, and you just haven't gotten lucky with kills. The rest of this fight really isn't very interesting. There's not a lot of Confederate army left. I shatter whatever's around. I go take the flags. Whoop-de shit. The hard part's over. If you can secure, like in my opinion, flow of the battle, right? If you can secure your position at Pittsburgh Landing, you've won. If you can get your artillery set up at Pittsburgh, unless you've been forced to give ground obscenely quickly, and the Confederates are, close to full strength or whatever, right? Like in that instance, you might still lose it even if you've been secured. But from my read, if you've been fighting it out, no matter how bad you're doing, and don't get me wrong, I think I did awful, or my army is in a really rough state, put it that way. No matter how bad you did, if you've been fighting it out and bleeding the Confederates even a little bit, by the time you're at Pittsburgh, you'll have gotten 2 waves of reinforcements, plus the Navy, plus the trenches, plus its great defensive terrain, yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. Especially if you've been doing any of this force multiplier killing that we just got done talking about. If you've been killing their cavalry or killing their cannons or capturing their cannons or their supply wagons, which is another force multiplier, like these battles go on long enough, right? Like that they run out of ammo. You need ammo. So they don't have any of that stuff. They're firing at 30% speed, which is a huge punch in the face. I don't actually know if being out of ammo imposes any other penalties beyond that. I think it probably doesn't. I think it's probably just the reload speed reduction, but I actually have no idea. So yeah, I'm just using the free troops basically to shatter and beat up everybody else because my units have earned their respite as far as I'm concerned. So they're going to hold the line, and I'm going to go beat them up. And I want to use as much time as I get on this battlefield. I don't want to take any of the flags yet. What ends up happening is I kill the army, so there's nothing left. And the game's like, cool, you captured all the points. Bingo, bango, you won. Congratulations. But yeah, see, there you go. We get them all. Or no, I'm just checking the screen. All right. So by the time you get to the point where you're holding Shiloh or holding Pittsburgh, yeah, 15,000 casualties. And I lost. I got a unit went missing, a bunch of promotions, a bunch of dead, but they don't show up because there was a day change. I went back to camp. We capture a bunch of guns, which is nice and useful. That's good. Bunch of money, like I said, $45,000 or thereabouts, maybe 45. Some guns, we have the resources to rebuild. We also get $250,000 and 12,000 more dudes. So, we're going to be okay. I put 2 pips into recon, 1 pip into econ, because, again, I got to build the army up. My plan going forward is to put 2 more pips into recon before Gaines Mill. And then one pip into medicine or AO or something for that last battle. Probably AO, actually. Because I want to bring as big an army as I can manage to every battle from here on out at this point. I'm not going to do the camp stuff in this video. You've already watched long enough, but there's cleanup, all that kind of shit. We're going to get the army ready for the march towards Gaines Mill, which should be a pretty fun battle. Again, my goal here is to bring as big an army as I can manage to that fight, no matter how inexperienced it is. I am bound and determined to make this kind of low training start work. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to take training later on, because I'm going to. But I'm maximizing things like AO, econ, medicine, recon, all the stuff around it. I'm not going to mess too much with politics, I don't think. Maybe I will, I don't know. And I'm not prioritizing training because I like that's the meta right now. Everyone talks about training, free stats. It's good. It is. It objectively is. It's a very good stat. There's nothing wrong with more hit points and more firearm and more stamina and all that kind of shit. It's good. As I grow the army, though, like I'm going to work on making this sucker big. Because like at a certain point, like in the config file I'm holding the Confederates to the same unit size caps as I have. So they can't scale infinitely. Right? And so the goal is to get to the point where if the biggest they can be is, I don't know, 4,000 or whatever, then if the biggest I can be is 4,000, then that's the biggest they can be. And at a certain juncture, we're trading 1 for 1. My big-ass army and their big-ass army are beating it out. And yeah, I might have 0, 1, or 2 stars, and they'll have 3. All right, fine. But I can coordinate fires. I can coordinate movement, maneuver, etc., etc. So that's the hope. We'll see if it plays out that way. I don't know. All right, cats, it's been going on long enough. Hope you're all doing great and, enjoying the weather, avoiding the cicadas, as the case might be. I will be doing Secure River. I'm recording this on what the hell day is it? It's 25th of May. So I'm recording this 25th of May, 2021. I will be doing Secure River towards the tail end of this week. I'm going to try and record it live. We'll see how it goes from there. And should be a good time. Thanks again for sticking this out. This is the Battle of Shiloh. 15,000 casualties out of 24. Or some low number that went, I don't know, maybe 32. Like it's around 50%, which is what I was afraid I was going to be. And here we are. So, yay, good times. All right, cats, I'll see you in the next one. This is Fiasco. Thanks very much for watching this one, or watching this all out, and I will see you on the field. Bye.